we'll be able to access this later and maybe send it to any of the participants who were not able to join us. But thank you so much for coming. My name is Andrew Bort. I'm the Executive Director for the Institute for the Advancement of Group Therapy. We're a continuing education course that focuses on the effective delivery of evidence-based practices and looking at facilitation skills to meet the needs of diverse groups. So I personally am a lifelong learner and an educator, and I've loved it my whole life. I've loved learning. I also walked into a hurricane on purpose because I ran out of beer. And so I have struggled with mental health and substance use issues in the past. And it was my own experience in treatment that actually motivated me to get into the behavioral health field. See, I have ADHD. And so for me, in the traditional group therapy space where, the clinician was going around one at a time, how are you? How are you? How are you? Is very uncomfortable for me to have to just sit there. My knees are bouncing and I'm imagining all the ways I can escape the room. Of course, there were great parts of my therapy. Also, I love my therapist and things like that. But the reality is there are people like me in groups all over the country. And in fact, if I was virtual, I would be a terrible patient because I would have Xbox and cats and kids and all these other things to distract me from paying attention. And so what we do really at the Institute is we think, what kind of tools and strategies can we use to meet the needs of diverse learners? Because it's not just people with ADHD that are sitting in groups. There are people who didn't graduate fifth grade. There are people with different levels of education, different cultural expectations, different background experiences that color their current perceptions. Different learning preferences. They're very, very diverse groups, right? And so when we're thinking, what are the best ways to facilitate so we can really meet all of those needs? We're going to go over some of those skills today. But I do always like to start a training with like the purpose, process, and payoff. And so the purpose of this is to make the groups more engaging. And the process is we're going to go through this workshop. We're going to hear some best practices from our partners on this. We have Inovia Behavioral Health. We have Marriage and Family Therapy Services, Misfits Addiction Counseling, and A New Life. And so they're going to chime in and give you some best practices as well. And you're going to walk away with some tools to better engage your groups. So I do think it's important to remember that these are tools. So they are to be used when you deem appropriate. Okay. And so I've been in lots of groups where some very heavy stuff has been, explained. And, for moments of process affordance, absolutely take those. Okay. These tools will work most of the time, but you decide when the best time is to use them. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started now. And the first thing I'm going to ask everyone to do is just take a minute and consider, what is the difference between knowledge and skill? And if you could put it into one sentence to describe the differences, what would it be? And please send that into the chat. And my fellow participants, you can throw stuff into the chat as well. I see Laura is typing. Thank you very much. Yeah, skill seems action-based. Knowledge is theory. Skill is practice. Okay, great. So we'll start off with those. If anybody disagrees or wants to expand, you can go ahead and throw those into the chat. But that's absolutely true. So there are things in life that we are biologically inclined to learn. Recognizing the face of a friend, or if food is spoiled, we can tell through multiple senses. But other things require practice. And so when my partner at the Institute, Nick, and I, when we go around the country, and we've observed groups at hundreds of facilities, from the $17,000 a month to Medicaid clinics. And what we see quite common is that therapists are very well versed in helping patients overcome fear, right? And put ideas in their head. But for the things that require practice, this is a piece that we see is often missing. And I'll give you an analogy with the swimming. So my wife, Jessica, she is deathly afraid to go near the pool. If you've ever worked with an adult who's afraid of swimming, generally they have some sort of trauma around water early in their life. And they don't even want to go in. They're terrified. And so let's say my wife wanted to go into the pool. That's her goal. That's what she really wants to do. So she goes to see a therapist. So the first step would be developing that therapeutic alliance, helping Jessica become comfortable near the water, maybe unraveling some cognitive distortions associated with water. But what happens if she jumps in? I mean, she's confident now. She can go in the pool. She's going to jump in. What's going to happen? You can throw that into the chat, but I think we know she'll drown, right? She doesn't know how to swim. Just because she's comfortable going near the water doesn't mean that she's going to be able to do it. So we'll go to the next step. Let's say the therapist writes down the mechanics of swimming on the board, right? You would need to kick your legs. You need to paddle your arms. You need to hold your breath occasionally. Okay, great. So now Jessica is comfortable going near the water, and she knows in her head, oh, I know what I need to do. But what happens if she jumps in? She drowns. Okay, so what she really needs is practice. She needs to get in that pool and practice, practice, practice. And this is why groups are such an ideal place to set up these practice situations, because everybody in there is so diverse. So you could do role play activities where people think about, tough conversations that they're going to be having when they get out of treatment, and they can practice those with a couple different people who will give them different responses every time. And right, we're preparing for the unexpected in the world outside of treatment. And so these practice opportunities are very, very vital. And I know my colleagues will go over some of the ways to help do that practice virtually. But before I turn it over to them, I want to talk a little bit about just introducing topics, just like I just did. So I had you write into the chat your idea of knowledge or skill. So the reason I did that is I'm checking prior knowledge, right? I don't want to find out in 45 minutes or 90 minutes that you have a different idea of knowledge or skill than I do. And this is very, very common in groups, whether it be psychoeducational or CBT, like if you're discussing epigenetics or something, you want to get everybody on the same page. So when you're introducing a topic, we see this done a number of ways. So the clinician might read the definition from a manual or a curriculum. In this case, no patients are talking. They might pose the question to the group. What does epigenetics mean to you? How does it factor into your life currently? In that case, one usually confident member will answer, where 80%, 90% of the room, again, will stay silent. If you really want to have an understanding of what everybody's thinking, you could go around one at a time. That's going to take anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, though. So just a quick tip, and this is what we do in the live training. I just have you turn to the person next to you. You have 2 minutes to come up with a definition of knowledge and skill that you both agree with. And so what happens here? Well, every single person in the room is now talking. So you know that they're consciously focused on the question that you're asking them to discuss. Even the introverts who might not feel comfortable to share their idea out loud when they've got a room of people watching them, much more likely to share when it's one-on-one, especially if they know everybody else in the room is preoccupied. But most importantly, you as the clinician, you can monitor the conversations and address misconceptions early on. Now, if this were virtual, if this were Zoom, I would kind of do the exact same thing. A little bit more difficult for the clinician to monitor, but remember, you don't really need to hear everything the patient's saying every single time. So you could, set up some breakout rooms, give them 3 minutes to do the exact same thing, to discuss the topic, come up with a definition they both agree with. And then when you bring it back to the room to have, some people share, they're much more comfortable with the information, right? They've had a chance to digest it. They've bounced some ideas off of a partner. And so they're much more likely to be comfortable to share. Okay. So I think from there, we're going to turn it over. So it can be a challenge to set up some of these practice opportunities, right? And so there are a number of challenges counselors and clinicians face virtually. So let's turn it over to our experts in the area. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and we're going to start with Danielle.
Okay, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I see couples and families in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So I'm coming from a clinical perspective of having multiple people in the same therapy room virtually, and also multiple screens. Sometimes people are on different devices. So for balancing multiple people in the room virtually, letting go of what you can't control, I think, is really important. Any technology problems, internet, things like that, that you try to help in the moment, but you can't control. And then the personality traits of not only the therapist or the clinician or the group leader, but also the members. So if there is ADHD, or people are having a hard time sitting still, or they're distracted, or they're over talking or under talking, trying not to place that judgment and panic in yourself, to try to take control of that, because we have to respect everybody's way of learning. And then the noises in your own life, any dogs or noises in the background like construction, things like that, that can make you worried, but at the end of the day, the people are more focused on what they're getting out of the group. And then not being afraid to address whatever you see. So something we see in therapy is sometimes people will try to use substances, smoking or drinking during session. It loosens you up, it helps you talk, but explaining in the moment that it can help to have your raw self and your brain fully there, and we can work through the uncomfortableness together. And then someone showing up with another person on screen too. So maybe they have a family member in that session and you didn't know that prior, talking about confidentiality and how we have to respect everybody, and it's a safe space. And then also if someone is in a public location, so maybe they show up on a beach or in a park and you see people in the background, or they're in a state that you're not licensed, not being afraid to just address that in the moment, because you want to make sure that you're able to see that person legally. And then modeling the boundaries as the leader too. So arriving on time yourself and staying focused as much as you can, discussing the importance of everyone's involvement, revisiting the goal. Sometimes you can lose track of that. And so being the one to facilitate and keep everybody on track. And then not interrupting or over talking, and letting the group kind of form and talk with each other as well.
Thank you, Danielle. And I realize I did not give y'all a chance to introduce yourselves. So why don't you go ahead and do that real quick before I turn it over to Josh?
Well, I'm Josh Mason, founder of Misfit Addiction Counseling. I'm a certified addiction counselor. And we founded the company with this idea that we could do things better, more efficiently, and just develop a model of high engagement, client-centered treatment. So thank you.
Okay, and then do you have anything to add for just best practices for balancing people virtually, Josh?
Yeah,
And then,
yeah, absolutely. We take the approach that you have to allow clients to kind of chart their own course in a lot of ways. Granted, you're going to put up the guardrails, right? So it doesn't veer too far off. But, client success in so many ways is based on, how engaged they are and how motivated they are. So you have to allow them to have some volition, some direction of their own in this process, right? And I think there's a tendency of facilitators to want to control the space to a large extent. And what we try to do, or I think is a great practice, is allowing them, allowing the clients, allowing the group to somewhat chart their own course, with the objective in mind, right? So they know where we're trying to get in the group counseling session, right? But how we get there is completely up to them, right? And it builds this intrinsic motivation, right? It builds this ability for them to, buy in and have a voice in this process. So we try to do that and just really reinforce this notion of, almost empowerment through, choice and direction. So, yeah.
awesome. Thank you. Great shares there. Okay, Orlando, do you want a chance? Please introduce yourself, your company, and chime in here.
Yes. So my name is Orlando Andrews, and I'm the Director of Business Development and Outreach for Inovia Behavioral Healthcare. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I celebrated 13 years of continuous sobriety, January 6th. For the last 9 years, I've worked in addiction, and it became obvious that there's a gap in services to support a person's underlying mental health issues. So with Inovia Behavioral Health, we provide virtual app-based mental health, behavioral health, and addiction support groups that are led by a therapist, counselor, support specialist, or coach to kind of address those issues. And so continuing on to like the topic, we are a little different. We are actually support groups, and support groups are a bit different from group therapy. They're going to be more accessible and less intensive. So its effectiveness, as we have seen, mostly is evidenced in like the anonymous programs that have actually shown that they can be very effective in helping a person in their care. So in this space, because it's not so intensive, it needs the facilitator must really set the tone and be able to make sure that the group remains a safe space and keeps people on topic. So you want to make sure you have like rules of the room, like the cameras are going to be on, you need to remain stationary, be muted unless you're going to be sharing. If there's an expectation to participate, like you must share, or we expect you to share, or you can just attend and watch, to keep people from like, taking over the group with like just random shares. You might want to do time shares, like 3 minutes to give everyone time to actually share in the group. You want to have a crosstalk statement where, people in the group aren't criticizing each other or commenting on necessarily what another person has talked about or judging what another person has said. Make sure that the person is kind of keeping their statements to I statements or me statements and keeping the focus on personal experience and growth, and to make sure that everybody understands that this is not a platform for political hate speech or religious dumping ground, that everything is about what the topic is and what people are trying to accomplish.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And JD, please introduce yourself and chime in here. And please also share about the awesome program you guys are doing to sponsor, for every person that signs up, you sponsor somebody for a group. I think that's fantastic.
Thanks. Hey, Andrew, thank you very much for having us, and all the other panelists. Fantastic job. So I'm honored to be here. I am also a person in long-term recovery, and I'm the founder and CEO of New Life Virtual. Prior to New Life Virtual, I'll get to that in a second, I owned and operated brick and mortar treatment centers, serving all levels of care from detox all the way through outpatient, realizing what worked and what didn't. New Life Virtual is a platform and an app that enables existing brick and mortar providers to digitize and scale their services to better deliver both individual groups, medication management, to plug into incredible programs like Inovia to extend care long-term at an affordable rate. So we're very happy to work with them and others. What I see with some of the challenges, I'm not a clinician, nor do I run groups. So I want to kind of come at it from the other perspective, is that what we need to do virtually, and we know that virtual works. We know that that people, tend to stay with virtual care longer. But what we're not currently doing, or most places aren't currently doing with, just straight Zoom links and other ways, is actually replicating what goes on before groups, after groups, making sure people get to groups comfortably. They're reminded about groups and consistently able to easily join groups, because sometimes that's an incredible stressor, just even figuring out how to log into a group, or what link do I need to use today, and then also building relationships before, like I said, before groups and after groups. And so some of those challenges that reside in just straightforward technology is, how do we build those relationships with people, both our care teams and our and our peers. And so,
can you hear me?
I think it's important that providers use some type of tool.
I don't know if you can hear me, but JD got kicked out.
Ensures
and
that
he
their
re-entered
group
as
attendees
a participant. He put that in the
the
chat
adequate
a little while
information
ago.
to just get to their groups and to be in the right spot, to be able to ask questions during those groups. So that's just kind of setting the table. And what we did, Andrew, I think you were alluding to, is back when we were delivering virtual care, when I had the brick and mortar treatment centers. And one of the wonderful things about virtual care is opening up access and lowering cost to deliver. And so we were able to provide a 2-for-1 program. So for every 2 people that came into our digital program, we scholarshiped someone else to go through this intensive outpatient program. And so I think it's, a wonderful idea that people can extend to just kind of open up access to people that may not have had that before. So anyway, that's just kind of my take on some of the challenges with existing virtual delivery, is building more of a community in and around your groups.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting. So I'm hearing some people that are having trouble hearing JD. I heard you just fine. So my assumption is that the recording will work just fine. JD, if you want to try to hop off and rejoin again, and I can try to reassign you again, we can work on that on the side. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do, and thank you so much everyone for sharing, is we're going to talk about how learning happens in the brain. This is important because we have 2 learning systems. We have the declarative, which is like for facts and information, and we have the procedural. And it really ties into to treatment, whether it be for depression, substance use. How our brains work is important to understand. And so I'm going to show you a video now for all of the participants, but I'm not just going to have you watch it. And the reason is I need to give you a reason to watch it. If I just show a video and you have no idea what you're looking for, then you probably are going to zone out, start going on your phone. And this happens with patients in groups also. So we are going to watch this video, and I want you to consider these questions. Like, what is the connection between the conscious and unconscious mind when it comes to learning? How long does it take him to ride the backwards bicycle? How long did it take his son? And why is that time different? And what happens when he tries to ride the regular bike again? And what does any of this have to do with mental health and addiction? I am going to put those into the chat, so you should be able to see them now. Again, not Nick Jarowski, but it is what it is. I tried to fix that all morning, by the way. Anyway. All right, so we are going to get started now. And please let me know in the chat if you cannot hear this. I think we tested it earlier and it should work.
I've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. That damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill, and I was really proud of it. Everything changed, though, when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses, and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle, and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike, ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better.
Yeah. I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. So, this way.
All right, a second. All right, so whenever you're ready. Yeah. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, look, all right, let's do it again. Just give it wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. And go. Oh, no! All right, okay. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right on. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Yeah, come on.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck, but at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up? Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child. Myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment. Got it. I'm back. Oh, click. Hold on, click. I got it. Okay, there it is. There's the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike. I tried to explain this to the people around me, and they just didn't get it. They thought I was faking the previous 20 minutes, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me. That looked like I faked that, didn't it?
Yeah.
Just a fake. You think I'm faking. You don't believe me.
It looks so weird. You were like, la la la, and it's
You think I'm lying, don't you? I'm not lying. I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. You get smarter every day. Have a good one.
Okay. So I understand that we lost sound there for a little bit, but I'm going to take some of the advice from the co-presenters and just roll with it, right? Because we can't always control technology, so it is what it is. Let's see. Does anyone have? No. Okay. So first off, I want to start with this. I fully support using videos and even text in some cases to support virtual or group learning in general. And the reason that is if you think of information like a highway, if I just tell you something, we've built one on-ramp to that information. But if you forget what I said, you've lost all your access. If I tell you something, I show you something, I have you write it down, I have you talk to a partner about it, and then I put you in some sort of small group where you do some real world problem solving activity around the topic. Now we've built so many on-ramps to that information that even if you forget what I said, you can still access it. And of course, our goal is to get the patients to have their knowledge and skill to be placed into their long-term memory. So not only do they acquire it, but they retain it and they can actually recall it once they leave treatment. This is how they're going to be successful in their recovery. Okay, so fully support using videos, but again, I want to give them, whether it's text or video, I want to give them something to do, something to look for, a reason to pay attention. Now, for you, if you can, you want to throw in the chat, what is the connection between conscious and unconscious mind when it comes to learning and processing? Anyone have an idea? I also put the link to the full video in there in case you want to see it later. Habit. Okay, interesting. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, if you do something long enough, it'll eventually become unconscious, and we'll get to that in a second. So the conscious mind is sequential and logical, and actually it can only focus on one thing at a time. The conscious mind really can't multitask, though you can jump consciously back and forth so quickly that it might seem like you're doing that. The unconscious mind is spontaneous and processes information instantly. This should be an easier one. I don't think the sound cut out for this. How long did it take him to ride the backwards bike? See, Laura is typing. Yeah, 8 months. Well done, Brian, JD, Laura. Okay, 8 months. All right, and how long did it take his son? Why do you think that time was different? 2 weeks. Yeah, thank you so much for participating. It's very, very important. I appreciate it. All right, so 2 weeks. So the reason he gave was because children have more neuroplasticity in their brains. Actually, the example he gave was incorrect. And so we only think children learn language faster than adults because the platelets in their tongue haven't hardened yet. And so they can produce sounds like a native speaker, regardless of if they're learning multiple languages at a time. But if you've ever taught 5th grade, or if you have a 10-year-old, you will know that they still occasionally confuse irregular verbs, especially if they're like in a heated argument or something. And in fact, in Arabic-speaking countries, the grammar is so complex, it takes them about 12 years to master their language. An adult can learn a language in 3 to 4 years, right? As long as they have the dedication and the practice. And so an alternative reason why his son could pick up the backwards bike faster has to do, like what Brian says, with neural pathways. So if you think about the brain like walking to a destination in the forest, the first couple times you go towards a destination, you're just going to be crunching over leaves and grass, but eventually you'll wear a groove into the dirt. And this is how the brain works, okay? And in the brain, eventually that groove in the dirt will become a trench. And this is why old habits are so hard to break. So while the brain only makes up 2% of the body's mass, it uses 20% of its energy. And conscious thought, which originates from the prefrontal cortex, is the most energy intensive form of thought. And the brain looks to limit this whenever possible, right? And again, it's why old habits are so hard to break. And one example that we always like to use, because it's pretty much universal, if you drive and you've ever planned to pick up something from the store after work, maybe you get lost in thought and end up pulling into your driveway. Has that ever happened to you? Go ahead and throw it into the chat if it has. Or is this the first group where that does not apply to you? Okay, good. See, when JD's typing, it makes me think, okay, you can still hear me. Fantastic. Yes, for sure. Okay, so your brain has created an unconscious automated process for both driving the car and the route home. And so your brain will default to that when you're driving. It's the same thing with riding a bike, with swimming, even typing on a keyboard. When you were first learning to type on the keyboard, you had to pay very careful attention to where your fingers were going and where the keys were until one day, snap, and you don't have to do it anymore. And this is what we want for our patients in therapy. We don't want someone who's quick to anger to have to stop and think about what to do. We want them to go into deep breathing or whatever other coping skill they've practiced without even realizing it. And so, in neuroscience, and we'll get to this in a few slides, we say fire it to wire it, but in treatment, fire it to rewire it. And so the important thing to take away here is that adults do have neuroplasticity in their brain, and you absolutely can rewire it. People recover all the time. Okay, so number 4, what happens when he tries to ride the regular bike? Anyone? Right. Yeah, it didn't have sound at that part. Yeah, he couldn't do it. Okay, so initially he could not do it. All right, he had practiced the backwards bicycle so many times that he had created an unconscious automated process for the backwards bike, and he couldn't find the old pathway again. Eventually he could. And so it's always important to remember that, especially, with those who are in recovery for something like addiction. Absolutely, that old trench, that's still there. But if you use the new pathway enough, it will be just as comfortable to take as the old one. Eventually the old one will be overgrown. Is there a possibility you can still go back that direction? Absolutely. But it's going to be much, much less likely if we fire and rewire and we get those new neural pathways, the one that are not maladaptive behaviors, we get those going strong, more success in recovery. Okay. And lastly, what does any of this have to do with mental health and addiction? Ooh, great recommendation, Danielle. I probably should get that book for myself. Okay, so the last one, we touched on this a bit already. So, okay, Brian's going to type. Let's see what he has to say. Yeah, we can change our brain. Yeah, to help us deal with chronic disease and illness. Okay, so yeah, it's very important to understand that. So a lot of times in behavioral health, we hear one side of the story, that drugs change your brain. In reality, everything you do changes your brain, right? If you switch to only broccoli for your meals for the next month, it will change your brain. If you learn a new language, it will change your brain. And so I think the more important part of the narrative is that it's only going to remain permanent changes if you continue to do those behaviors. If you switch to new behaviors, to healthier behaviors, your brain will change again. Okay, and so that's a good thing to help patients understand as well. And before I move on to the next slide, I do want to give my co-presenters a chance to chime in here. Is there something that you all would like to add? Danielle, you want to start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking how it's related to mental health and learning new coping skills and ways, and you can feel really stuck in not knowing how to get out of a situation or not knowing what coping skills to use. But the more you practice it and the more repetition that you have, and that's why we always recommend in between therapy sessions or in between, whether it be groups or families or couples, that they practice these skills not only in the therapy room but outside of it, because the more exposure you have to it, the easier it will become, and it will become, like you said, second nature.
Great. Josh, anything to add?
Not too much. I mean, just, piggybacking off of that, just this idea that you know, the real work, right? The real progress is not necessarily always in the group setting or that group dynamic, right? It takes place outside as well. So as much support and kind of like wrap around you can provide for the clients, the better they're going to do.
Orlando?
So similar to what Danielle was saying, I like the concept of actually learning a new behavior. You know, the old behavior is usually a coping mechanism that you've picked up from trying to deal with whatever your mental health or underlying condition is. And actually even going to therapy or getting involved in group therapy or going to support groups is a new behavior that you have to learn and a new skill that you're trying to build. So that it does take a lot of effort and just consistency.
Excellent. And JD, you want to see if we can hear you this time?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Well, I can, but I could hear you last time. Can someone else throw in your JD?
Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, I think all the comments were fantastic. I don't really have much to add except for just, you know, this brings to mind, you know, patience, you know, educating people and being patient with themselves and with the process. And I think it also, a good analogy is why peer support and community is so important, because if you feel like you're the only one that can't ride this backwards bike, you're not going to want to continue to try. However, if everyone around you has also told you that, look, this has taken me, you know, 8 months to learn to ride this backwards bike, it feels a little bit more acceptable. And I think you're up for the challenge of learning this or relearning this skill.
Okay, awesome. All right, so for this next one, I'm not going to be able to see the chat just for a moment, so I'm going to just let everyone know that ahead of time. We're going to talk about how learning happens.
Hey, it's me, Destin.
Nope, not that one. No, we're not. Just kidding. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of adult learning. See, I know what's going on. I don't let the PPT dictate what I'm going to say. All right, so the first requirement for learning to occur is conscious attention. Okay. And this really emphasizes the point of you have to get your patients engaged. It's why the commercials turn up the volume. If you're not paying attention, you're never going to buy their product. It's why if you fell asleep in math class and you missed how to do long division, there's no way to get that back. You need to be paying attention to something initially in order for you to get that input. Okay. Unconscious automated processes we talked about a little bit. And these are just the patterns and the repetition in your brain have created spontaneous and instant responses. Okay. Again, the brain doesn't need to think about it. You don't need to process. You don't need to do any of that. And I'm going to give you an example of that right now. And again, we are going to use the chat feature. And I just realized I painted myself into a corner here, but go ahead and type this into the chat. Orlando, I'm going to have you help me here and please send me a message when they're entering their responses. Can you do that? Okay. So I'm going to show you a sentence with the verb missing, and I want you to fill it in. Okay. Here's the first one. Okay, so this one is I am not at the store right now. Here's the next one. Just go ahead and throw the missing word into the chat box, please. Okay, so this one is you are not at the store right now. Third one. I was not at the store yesterday. Fourth one. Now there's two options here. So we'll take either one. So this is, I haven't been or I haven't gone to the store yet today. And if I were you, I'd go to the store before dark. Okay, so this one, it's becoming much more common for people to say was, but of course, well, the correct grammar is were, because this is the subjunctive clause in number 5. So it's a hypothetical situation. We use past participle, that is were. So if you got most of these or all of these, how did you do that? So believe it or not, this is very complex grammar. We've got first person singular present tense, second person singular present tense, first person singular past tense, first person singular present perfect tense, and again, the subjunctive clause. And so most people can do this, even if they couldn't tell me why we would use was in sentence 3 versus were in sentence 5. It's one of those knowledge and skill things again. Or also, if you could not really explain, when would you use present perfect tense, right? Well, it's for an action that started in the past but continues into the present. Again, your brain does this automatically, just like it does for the other skills that you use every day with frequency, right? And that's how we want to think about recovery capital skills, whether it be restructuring negative thoughts, meditation, using I statements through assertive communication. These are skills that patients really need help practicing. And if they can master them, they will do better outside of treatment and in recovery. So maximizing repetition and practice is how we're going to get them to do this and master these skills. And so setting up those authentic practice opportunities as much as possible. And real quick, I want to take it back to my experience in therapy again. It is very common, again, for therapists to sometimes deliver group therapy like it's individual therapy with 9 people watching. And that's this idea of one person talking at a time. This graphic here is from William Miller, the co-creator of motivational interviewing. And through his research, he found very important things. Okay, the first one is the more a clinician was empathetic, which means they were not doing the talking. They would ask elicitation questions, but they put most of the work on the patients. The more empathetic a therapist was, the fewer patient-resistant behaviors there were. Okay, so again, you're not telling patients what to do, and so they don't really have a reason to fight with you. Like you get them to buy into whatever activity they're doing. You have them working with each other, talking to each other, and patient resistance goes down. Number 2, and this is the most important one, the more positive change talk that a patient had throughout a session directly correlated to their success outside of treatment. And so we want the patients to be talking. I mean, they're the ones that are coming to you. They're the ones in therapy. They need to be doing the work. And it actually makes the job easier for the counselor or for the clinician because they don't have to talk as much. And especially, if it's the delivery model of just reading from the curriculum, it's going to be much better and more enjoyable experience overall if all of the patients are engaged. Because if you think about it, if you have a room of 12 people and everyone gets 5 minutes to talk, by the time the hour's up, everyone's talked for 5 minutes and listened for 55 minutes. And we all know that they're not listening that whole time, right? If we can zone out while we're driving a car, they're going to be zoning out if people are just droning on one at a time. And so it's really, really important, if you can, to minimize the therapist talk time as much as possible, but increase that patient talk time. And you can do this through, pair work, small group activities, the idea that processing happens in a vacuum, even if it's a process group, you can give them the topic and split them into pairs of 3. And I saw a very successful example of this when I was observing a clinician in Kentucky in September, where they were processing relationships or an event that they had with their parent, the negative event that they had with their parent. The first time he did the standard model where he just asked one person to talk about it. Everybody else was sitting there listening, and it was like one person at a time. The day after our training, he had that same topic again with a different group, and he did the exact same thing. He just split them into pairs, and he's just like, wow. I mean, the amount of time that each patient got to actually talk and process went up significantly, right? But by splitting it up into those small groups. Okay, so there are 4 principles of adult learning that we should take into consideration whenever we're trying to motivate a group of adult learners to move towards a common goal. All right, and they are motivation. So this one is incredibly important. This is the why. This is the buy-in. This is pretty much what every other principle is connected to. Inclusion of life experiences. People are going to be much more likely to participate if they feel they have something to contribute. Also, if they feel like the topic does resonate with them, or that it's useful for them, that it will help them later on, much more likely to engage with the material. So it's our job as facilitators to make that connection. Nobody likes being told what to do. I bet everybody in this room can attest to that. So by giving patients an opportunity to make their own choices about maybe how something is completed, like we mentioned before, not everyone is a strong reader, right? And so if you're requiring some sort of written assignment, giving them an option to, orally tell you the answer, or to draw it in a cartoon, or anything, giving some options of how to complete something will be motivating. Also, speaking of autonomy, I mean, the goal is for patients to be able to do these things without you holding their hand, because you're not going to be there once they leave treatment, right? And so scaffolding and extra support is very important in the beginning, but you want to try to tailor that and remove it as you go through and as they gain more mastery of the knowledge or skill. And real world problem solving and projects. And if a task is too difficult, then people will get frustrated. If it's too easy, they'll be bored. But if you can give them problem solving tasks that are at a appropriate level, then there's a sense of accomplishment when they finish it. And this is also why small group or pair work is so vital, because people have different strengths, different skills, different knowledge, and different backgrounds. So they can help fill in each other's gaps. And so maybe what will be a struggle for one person to accomplish, maybe it's appropriate for 3, and they can accomplish it together. Okay, and the last thing on this slide that I'm going to talk about is conceptual frameworks. And so I talked about therapist talk time and patient talk time. The goal for us is to try to get it to about 20-80, where the therapist or the counselor is going to be speaking for about 20% of the time, and patients are going to be doing the work 80% of the time. That's a good goal. Of course, everything's going to be a little different, but that's a good goal to aim for. And that 20% is used to establish conceptual frameworks. Okay, so this is schema. And so an example of this is if I told you, 我住在中国10年半了, and I asked you in 10 minutes to tell me what I just said, there's no way you could do it unless you speak Chinese, right? Because you don't have a bucket for that. You don't have anywhere to put that information. But if I told you I lived in China for 10 years, well, now you have a chance because you know English. At least you have somewhere to put that, right? And so conceptual frameworks is just getting everybody on a relatively same page when it comes to the idea of a topic or what you're going to be talking about. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But even if you do, set up these opportunities for your patients, I mean, obviously there are still some challenges that facilitators will face, especially virtually. One of those things is nerves. And so I'm going to hand it over again to my counterparts here. And do you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah. So I think a really important aspect is thinking about the facilitator themselves, or the therapist or the group leader, and maybe having a notepad with you of writing the names of the people that are in the group. Not everybody writes their name or on the video screen. So that, because in person you can look at somebody or you can point to someone, but it's harder virtually. And then also keeping a notepad for yourself just to take notes, but then also just to doodle if you get distracted yourself. And then having one screen if possible. If you're having a trouble balancing people on multiple screens, if it's like a family or a couple, having them try to be in the same room and they're practicing these skills in their environment. But even if it is multiple screens, normalizing that there's going to be obviously internet issues, And then having a co-facilitator if you need one. So it can be hard. Some people can have stage fright or problems public speaking and just balancing conversation. A lot of people and therapists and clinicians steer away from working with more than one person in the therapy room because of this reason. So if you need somebody else to help you to kind of bounce in and out, if you get anxious or nervous, to kind of be able to help you, to divide the work. And then implementing activities. So it can be helpful for the clients, but it can also be helpful for the facilitator or the therapist. So having them do writing activities, even if you're starting to feel anxious or panicked in some sort of way, whatever you're doing verbally, having them do it physically, writing a list of helpful thoughts versus unhelpful thoughts, coping skills, things like that, or implementing some mindfulness. And as you're helping them breathe and focus, you're also kind of helping yourself. And then affirming yourself too. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. We're not perfect and we're going to make mistakes.
Okay, phenomenal advice there. I really like the part, especially, and this is something that I, as a facilitator, has done forever, is if I forget what I'm talking about, I just immediately tell them to, talk to each other. What was the most interesting thing you learned in the last 5 minutes? You just give yourself time to regroup. Josh, you have something to add here?
Yeah, if I could, I guess this notion that it's vital to communicate the norms of the group and obviously establish the norms of the group. And so you have that expectation. The clients know how things, how they're supposed to behave in that group setting. Things like, keeping the camera on, having a good audio hookup, and then also, this establishing the norm that, engagement and participation, that's our baseline. That's where we're operating from, right? That is where the real magic happens, is if everyone is engaged and going along that. And then also, kind of, I guess, obvious things, but maybe not so obvious to everyone. Norms around having respect for one another, confidentiality, that sort of thing. But I think if you establish those norms and communicate them effectively to the client, you get a lot of, everyone knows where they stand in the group, and what is acceptable and what isn't. So very helpful. Thank you.
All right. So I believe that when you get to the point of, so for group support groups versus group therapy, assessments are very important. Assessments are a good way to make sure that each member is appropriate for this particular level of care. Because in support groups, a lot of times people are trying to get out of formalized intensive treatment and do something that's a little less, less stringent, or trying to get out of therapy. So it's really important to make sure that the members of the group are appropriate for this level of care. So you want to have things in place like, of course, automatic dismissal, no using on camera, obvious inebriation in the group, inappropriate shares or abuse, triggering shares, things of that nature. Knowing when or how to refer this person to a higher level of care is super important, so that you can actually make sure that you get them into a place that's going to be appropriate for their level of care. Facilitators must also get to know each member of their group, letting them check in, understanding their motivations and what they're looking for, or looking to get out of the group. One of the things, is it mandatory participation versus optional? Because there's going to be people that are coming into support groups that are going to be court ordered, or coming from treatment programs. And so, when people are like, you have to go to AA or NA, it doesn't matter what their background is. It doesn't matter that they're being mandated to go. It's like everybody's kind of equal. They're all there for the same reason. So you have to kind of make sure there's no stigma behind it. So you have to make sure your group is also kind of that way, that they're equally engaged and participating and not feeling that they're being penalized or stigmatized. You want to make everyone feel welcomed and equal and that they're in a safe space. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, Orlando. JD?
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. Again, I'll just try to add on. I think it's the preparation, pre-group, and then post-group follow-up as well. So when it comes to preparation, what everyone was kind of mentioning, getting to know who's going to be there, as much as you can know, through reviewing assessments, perhaps having discussions prior to them being in the group, doing your best to ensure that the group is made up of people that can cooperate together as well. If there are strong personality issues between particular participants, figuring out if that can be solved before your next group. Follow up through feedback surveys, and as well as outcomes to determine what is the group getting out of the group, what are they not getting out of the group, so that they feel heard, and as well as I just kind of comment on surrounding the group with the participation outside of that group being important, right? Having people get to know each other, having the ability to interact between those sessions, where you're replicating as much of the brick and mortar type of environment as possible, helps. And the last thing is it's okay when things don't go okay, right? And to just not put so much pressure on yourself. As again, I'm not a clinician or a practitioner, but stuff's going to go wrong, right? I mean, sound goes off. People are, chiming in and they're messaging in. Just stay on course. You can't control everything. You can just control your preparation, and you can control, what you do after to follow up. And it actually helps you, I guess, relate better to the people in your group as well, because if you don't need them thinking that you're perfect, because they don't see that in themselves yet. So
awesome. And honestly, JD, I'm very impressed. It is difficult to be the last person to talk all the time, because all the good, you know what I mean? You think all the good ideas are already out there, but I think you're doing a fantastic job of closing us out there.
Right.
Orlando actually reminded me of something, which is, yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of those people don't want to be there, right? Maybe they're court mandated. Maybe their significant other has given them an ultimatum. Right. And so when I'm going to go back to the principles of adult learning real quick, if you look at these like motivation, how do you motivate, a room of 12 men? Like, let's say maybe they just finished in patient or something like that. Right. And so how do you motivate them to want to talk about their feelings? Right. And so one example that we like to use, that we used at the Institute, was, my partner went in and this was an inpatient situation where a lot of them, weren't sleeping very well. Those first couple of weeks of, recovery are really tough. And he just asked them, he said, hey, do you have relationships that are important in your life? Right. And everybody said, well, yeah. Okay. Well, there's this tool that has been shown to help strengthen relationships, or even rebuild broken relationships. Is that something that you might be interested in, learning about this tool that will help you with a goal that you just stated you had? Right. And so everybody's now bought in, right? We've connected it to their life experience. We're giving them the option. Hey, are you interested in learning about this tool? They could say no, but we presented it in a way where they just said they had this goal, and now we're going to help them obtain it. And so everyone's going to say, well, yes. Right. And now you introduce, okay, well, we're going to work on I statements. Right. Or if someone is committed to if someone's not committed to abstinence, how do you get them to make a recovery capital plan? Right. Same kind of thing. Does it make you feel good when people come to you for advice? Well, yes, it does. I mean, again, universal. Right. And so, well, what if somebody came to you for advice and asked you for help? What are some of the things that you might tell them? You know a lot more about recovery than a lot of people out there. We've been learning coping strategies, trigger identification. We've been learning this stuff over the past couple sessions. You might be able to be in a position to help somebody one day. What would you tell them? And so now they're building that plan, maybe even if they're not committed to abstinence themselves, but at least they're on the right track. Okay, so I am wrapping up here. I just have 2 more quick slides, and then we're going to go into the virtual best practices. So these are, this is objective setting. And if you as the facilitator, whether it be a counselor, clinician, if you can answer these questions, more importantly, if the patients can answer these questions, then that is going to be a surefire way to a successful session. So what do I want my patients to be able to do by the end of this? Okay, we want to use action words here. Patients will be able to demonstrate, list, describe, show, right? Understand is not appropriate because what someone understands versus what you think they understand can look very, very different, right? And this is universal. So this is going to be specific. What do you want them to be able to do? Okay. How will you know if they've achieved it? Okay. So this is the measurement piece, right? Again, understand is not enough. They need to be able to show you something, demonstrate something, tell you something that will convince you, okay, they did it. They did what I set out for them to do. And how does this objective connect to successful recovery, whatever they're recovering for? All right. And so when we go around the country observing groups, again, we always like to go outside and talk to the patients after. What about this time in treatment do you feel is going to make a difference for you? Some patients have been in there 6, 7 times. They can repeat the curriculum points verbatim, yet they're still in treatment again. Right. And again, knowledge versus skill, understanding how to explain what swimming is not the same thing as being able to do it. And so if the patients can understand, okay, I am learning to restructure negative thoughts because this will help me in my recovery because this. Okay, so if the patient can explain that, then it's a good session. And so I would challenge you, but also, invite you to try to answer these 3 questions before the next time you deliver a group and see how it goes. And of course, nothing's going to be perfect the first time. Make some modifications. One group will be different from the next group. But if you can answer these, it shows that you have a plan in place. And I know that that planning was echoed by some of the other presenters on here because it really is important. When you're responsible to move a large group of people towards a common goal, hope is not a strategy. You need some sort of plan. And this is echoed by, again, we're going to do a quote with William Miller. So when 2 chefs are working with the same ingredients, how different will their meals be? The answer here is startlingly clear. There are often large differences among therapists who are offering the same or similar treatments over time. So what this says is what you do matters. Okay. The role of the facilitator in this case, you're the content expert. The way you deliver material will make a difference for your patients. Right? Curriculums are just tools. So, I wield the tool one way, someone else wields it a different way. We can create something completely different. And so, do focus on facilitation. Ask the questions, is this the best way to deliver this for all these different learning types in the room, that kind of stuff. And you'll see a big difference for your patients. So thank you so much. I know I monopolized most of this time. I'm going to turn it over now to, Danielle for our virtual best practices, and then we'll wrap up with a short Q&A if we have time. Thank you.
Okay, great. So some virtual best practices. We've already talked a little bit about confidentiality, but it can be helpful to have it in writing, giving it to everybody in the room, on the different screens before they even start. And then you could also mention it at the beginning. But something that's really helpful is talking about recording, whether you want to allow them or not. You want to obviously protect your own privacy, but protect theirs and each other's. And then having a rule whether you allow them to discuss what happens in the group or in the family session or the couple session outside, because you don't want to hold people's vulnerabilities against them, whether they overtalked, undertalked, said something, because you want to keep it a safe place, and also the anonymity of if people see each other in the street afterwards, not gossiping. And then troubleshooting tips. So we talked about how there could be internet issues, but giving some actual tools to them in writing that they can go to in case it happens during the session and you can't help right there. Restarting the computer, being as close as you can to their router, closing any other programs that are using the internet. And then we also talked about the position of the microphone and the camera. Having a backup if the video goes out or the microphone goes out, being able to have them put their phone on speaker, and then you can kind of see the video going in and out, but at least you're able to kind of see them, but also hear them, because you can have them just mute the video and then talk on their phone. Another idea is the camera positioning. So if they put it at the top of the screen as opposed to a side screen, maybe turning the iPad so the camera's at the top, so that it looks like you're making more eye contact and more interaction and engagement with the with everybody in the group.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, you know, for many of our clients, this is their first encounter with counseling or therapy with the legal system. So we try to front load or prep the clients as much as possible. And JD kind of touched on this already, but you know, the more we can communicate with the client about like how the process is going to work, how they, you know, click on the Zoom link, how they can request documentation. The more we can do that, the more we can communicate, that the sessions go a lot smoother. And just, you know, relaying that, and you know, also, you know, including, you know, smaller things like Danielle was talking about, you know, the positioning of the camera, audio, the background, and then also prepping the counselors, right? Making sure that they're communicating and prepared to go into these sessions, right? You know, Zoom is great and virtual is wonderful, but it's only functional, right, if it's prepped and people know what to expect and how to engage with it. So in a nutshell, front loading and prepping everyone involved as much as possible and communicating that. Thank you.
So just to add to that, let's see here. Because of course, let's remind, we are doing support groups to educate people on what a mental health, behavioral health, addiction support group is, and that they are actually available, because for a lot of people, they don't even know they exist or what they are, that they can use them. You want to talk about how they're a little different from therapy and they can actually be used as a complement to therapy. You want to identify patients that are appropriate for this level of care. And like for me, I believe that it's really good to make it part of their aftercare, extended, or self-care program. So maybe have them do 2 or 3 support groups a week and then discuss the experience or what they learned during the next session. That way there's a kind of like a way of incorporating it into what's going on. Evidence shows that it could keep them from being so activated during their session as well, because they have some more support. You know, offering free support groups for specialized or underserved populations. We do free support groups for veterans, first responders, and healthcare workers. We also have a support group for therapists. So, you know, therapists need support as well. You know, I really believe you should attend some support groups to familiarize yourself as well. You know, go ahead and, you know, do some to kind of understand what's going on, and understand that support groups are a way to build community as well. So you can connect people with other people that are having similar experiences as you. It keeps people from feeling isolated or alone in their recovery. And so it gives them that support that they need. I mean, that's why it's a support group, support they need to like continue their process and continue their recovery and to continue their therapy. So that's it.
So I'm going to assume, Andrew, it's my shot. So very good. Anyway, I'll just add on Danielle, Josh, Orlando, great points. All of you, I think we've talked a lot about this, virtual practices through this. So kind of keep it short and, you know, and sweet. Think about this as your own office and making sure that you're set up with the right tools, right? So, you know, get set up and have the right tools so that you're comfortable delivering care. People can see you well. That you have automated processes set up that allow you to send out pre-surveys, post-surveys, outcomes, so that it's easy to make follow-up effective for you to build on that momentum. There are those tools, you know, out there, and to and to understand that, and to embrace. I think the biggest thing just more is to embrace virtual and hybrid care. So, you know, virtual care, I don't think is intended to, you know, replace in person. I think it's a fantastic augment to in person, opens up access and allows you to see more people with less friction, and actually get people to interact more. So, you know, just make sure you have the right tools, set yourself up, and then embrace the ability, you know, embrace that virtual care is not going anywhere.
All right, amen to that. I think that was a lot of great information. Hopefully, all of our participants that were here. I know some of you were, joined a little bit late, but I will make this available on YouTube, and I will send it out to anyone who registered. For those of you who were on for at least an hour, you will receive via email the certificate of credit for the CEU. And now we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to open it up. I'm actually going to experiment here. I'm going to turn it into a discussion. So now everybody should be enabled. You can either type into the chat, or you may unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like.
That was a perfect lesson to have you always be close to the mute button when it's 8:30 here and your kids are about to go to school and they're saying goodbye and throughout the house. So just another best practice is to be one click from the mute button.
Absolutely. I see Laura is typing a question, and feel free to target these questions. I mean, we've got licensed marriage and family counselor. We have, you know, support groups, facilitating groups that are hybrid, in person as well as on Zoom. Ooh, does anyone want to take this one?
I mean, I'll certainly discuss it. I think, you know, first and foremost, have the ability to, for your clients, patients, to be able to RSVP and join, whether they're going to be virtual or in person. If you're going to do hybrid groups, just make sure your in-person camera captures the entire room very clearly, so that everyone else can see the participants. If possible, you can also connect to a you know, a large screen TVs, monitors. It's not too difficult, so that everyone is in person can very easily see the people that are virtual as well. And they're very inexpensive microphones that everyone, you know, so that everyone can hear everyone properly. So think about it as setting up a conference room. And I know that maybe not you haven't set up a conference room, but you can do it very inexpensively, but it's not too difficult to get set up. So I think setup is key.
So I was actually going to defer to JD there for a second, so I'm glad he jumped in. Since that's something he does so well. I believe that it depends on like kind of what you're looking at. If you're looking at doing it as an individual provider, you know, what JD said is actually really good. But if you're looking as a group, if you have like a group practice, or you have like a IOP or PHP or something a little larger, you might want to try to outsource that space. You know, something that JD actually can help with as far as building a virtual IOP or a virtual outpatient facility. And you can also use Inovia to actually connect to our support groups to allow them to actually do support that way and kind of outsource it without actually having to do it yourself, so that you can actually just have your members participate in the Inovia platform, and then you can actually do their individual therapies.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump off of what Josh said in the chat here, because I have worked where I've had to deliver to both virtual and in person at the same time. And one thing that I always caught myself doing is almost forgetting that the virtual was there. And so I think assigning someone responsible in the group to remind the facilitator to bring them into conversations, like all of the activities we did where I asked you to use, the chat, any situation like that is just, okay, let's check in, make sure that, let's make sure whoever's here on virtual get their answers too, share them out with the group, same kind of thing. Anyone else want to chime in on this one? No? Okay. Are there any more questions? If not, we might be wrapping up 10 minutes early. Hey, nothing wrong with that, right? Okay, I don't see any more questions coming through. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you also to my co-presenters. And yes, I know my mouth, blah, blah, blah. So I appreciate you putting up with me. Forget to turn it over and stuff like that. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
Great job. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, in that case, please look out for my emails. I will be sending the CEUs for those of you who are here for longer than an hour. And also, I will send everyone the link to the video once it is uploaded. And again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Monday.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.